Hello, I'm Kathleen Elliott, and this is Charles Elliott, my husband. We're gonna talk about when we met because it could potentially have presented a ethical dilemma. And the title of this presentation is Should I or Can I Date My Client?
Sounds good. I met Kathleen when she came to my office for legal representation. I'm a lawyer here in Louisiana, and we got to know each other through that legal relationship and became more personal.
So the first thing I thought would be helpful is to clarify what exactly is the rule about lawyers dating their clients.
Okay.
The American Bar Association, so you might also interject, but there's the American Bar Association, which is the United States, and then there's also Louisiana state bar rules. Is that correct?
Yeah, the American Bar Association, the ABA, is a voluntary organization of lawyers across the country who try to work together to promote justice and legal things. The Louisiana State Bar Association has mandatory membership, so we have to follow those rules.
So basically, the American Bar Association says a lawyer shall not have sexual relations with a client unless a consensual sexual relationship existed between them when the client lawyer relationship commenced. And this is essentially so that lawyers could represent their spouses.
Well, we don't want to have a conflict of interest. We don't want to get in a relationship with our client that affects our legal representation of
Okay. So this is an excerpt from Louisiana legal ethics, specifically saying there's no specific prohibition against engaging in sexual relations with clients in Louisiana, but that it can present a conflict between the lawyer's personal interest and the client. So I wanted to ask you, what is the objective standard that you were operating under, or was it a personal belief system, or both?
I think it was both. I think it's inappropriate to start down that road of dating clients, and the rule only applies to sexual relationship, but sometimes it's more than that. And for some reason, it usually comes up in divorce cases where the woman's there, she's vulnerable, she's becoming single, she has a sympathetic ear from the lawyer, and it spawns a sexual relationship. That's when you get in trouble.
So what exactly is the problem with the client and lawyer relationship, as you see it?
Well, we're supposed to maintain independent judgment. We're supposed to give objective legal advice, not colored by any other relationship. But it's sort of like doctors, patients, psychiatrists, psychologists. They're supposed to maintain a separate relationship so that their judgment isn't clouded. There's also a perception that the client is at a disadvantage and that the lawyer is in a position of power and authority to make recommendations and to represent the client, and that can get fuzzed up if you're having a sexual relationship.
So do you know of anyone personally that was that did this, that got disciplined?
Yes, we've had some local lawyers get in trouble for engaging in sexual relationships with clients. Usually, it's in a divorce case where the woman is perceived to be vulnerable, the lawyer is perceived to be a little powerful, and that imbalance of power can lead to difficulties in the legal representation.
So in the particular cases that you know, where what exactly happened to the person that got in trouble?
Usually, there's a public reprimand, even though the public doesn't really know about it. Lawyers do, and sometimes there's a suspension from the practice of law. But these things become cumulative. The next time you get in trouble, they bring up this time that you got in trouble, and it becomes worse for you.
Okay. So among lawyers, is it giggly? Is it like a silly thing, or do y'all take that pretty seriously?
We take the discipline serious, but there's always a backstory that's kind of engaging and giggly. Yes, as
Yeah.
you said.
Like, okay. All right. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about how we met. Okay.
Okay,
So do you want to go for it, or do you want me to go for it?
I can give my version of the
Okay,
story.
go for it.
Kathleen's son was injured back in junior high school, and the first lawyer dropped the ball. The second lawyer dropped the ball on suing the first lawyer. He sent her to another lawyer that she was not happy with, and so I was the fourth lawyer in line. So I met her as really her son was the client, but she was also a client too because she was seeking reimbursement for some of her expenses.
So and again, just a little more on the backstory. My son was 11 when we first when he was injured, and the first lawyer dropped the ball, as you said, and so then I ended up having to sue that lawyer, and I really felt like it became like kind of a life of its own, where I was just kind of pulled along, and then the lawyers were trying to tell each other, trying to protect themselves, because no lawyer wants to get in trouble or be consequenced for having dropped the ball. So by the time I met you, Jonathan was in college, and so he was able to sign his own contract with you. But again,
Yeah, I
like
don't
I,
think there was any chance of a sexual relationship between us early on because you hated lawyers and
yeah,
you'd had enough of them.
right, right,
You just wanted it over with.
right. Okay, so I presented Charles with the types of ethical conflicts we've been talking about in class. And I presented him with a list and asked him which ethical dilemmas he struggled with, or that came to mind out of the list that I gave him. And the two that he said were deontology and ethics code of his organization and communication. Did you want to speak to that?
Sure. We have rules and we know what's right and what's wrong, but lawyers particularly have a set of written guidelines and rules that we're to follow. So, in looking at these ethical theories, um, the deontology is looking at what's right and what's wrong, act in accordance with rules. Lawyers are supposed to do that. Similarly, there's ethics codes for organizations, which are statements of norms or beliefs of the organization that encourage patterns of behavior that are appropriate. And so I think both of those describe the written ethical rules that we're trying to follow.
Okay, and so when you're if you meet somebody in the professional setting, there is some sort of guidance as to how a relationship is supposed to transpire, and so I wanted to speak a little to that. Yeah,
Okay.
so go ahead. I mean,
Well, again, the key to the legal representation is that we maintain objective, independent judgment. So we don't want that clouded by the pressures of a sexual relationship, a personal relationship. And so I personally think it's best just to keep arm's length with clients, and we did in our case. But the problem is once you start down that road, it's sex is good.
you start to make
Start to make
compromises. Yeah,
compromises
yeah.
and
So
rationalizations and justifications, and it just doesn't look good.
yeah. So like some of our justification, well, we didn't even date until I have here, you had me at summary judgment, because we waited to go on a date until the whole thing was over. And so we had kind of like a celebratory dinner. So
But part of that was just not to even start.
right. So we really didn't even start. I didn't really have a mind that, I don't know, we had to have in order to go on that dinner,
That was an
right?
excuse. Yeah.
But it was after the whole thing, so it was a
Right.
kind of an excuse just to say, hey, do you want to?
I can see you outside of work.
Right, now it's okay, and we have something to celebrate,
Right.
right? Okay, so so these are we're supposed to. I was supposed to come up with some questions for you as a student to ponder and to tell me. And I wanted these are the questions that I came up. Was it a professional or personal ethical decision, or both, that drove Charles to his decision? Do you think Charles had an obligation to his profession and how lawyers are perceived to wait? And then also, was I really a client? Because again, this whole thing started when Jonathan was 11,
Mhm.
and now he was 21 in his second year of college, which is ridiculous, by the way. I have to throw that in there. So he technically had signed on as a client, but I again had I guess I
You were
still,
controlling the case.
yeah, I was still a client because I was looking for financial reimbursement. And then also, I wanted to have your opinion about whether or not this particular situation of a lawyer dating his client has the same weight as some of those other ethical dilemmas that we come with, like a teacher dating a student. And I want to be completely exclusive to not, like a college age relationship, not a teacher in the news with all of the,
Right.
you know,
Um,
child things.
all right. Well, let me just work through these real quick. I know we got limited time here. I think it was professional and personal ethics that kept me and keeps me from um,
Keeps
dating.
you.
I'm still following the rule from dating clients. But Kathleen and I were, we were both single. We'd both been divorced for a pretty good while, so there was nothing untoward about our relationship. But at the same time, I like to keep business and pleasure separate. Um, do I think I had an obligation to my profession? Yes, I think lawyers generally frown on other lawyers dating their, we'll say, divorced clients. Although it happens, and sometimes they get married, and sometimes happily married, but it's just not good. Were you really a client? We joked about it, and we've joked about it since then, that Jonathan was really the client. But you did sign a contract with me, and you did have a claim. Does the same ethical principle weigh as like teachers dating students? Well, as a society, we've decided that high school um, teachers shouldn't date or have sexual relationships with their students, even though it is weird. When I taught school for a year, and so you're
Yeah,
21,
but not, that's
20.
not high school. Like I said,
No, but
let's
what?
be
But
super
you're
clear here. It's not high school
no, I was teaching high
age.
school, but
Yeah,
there's not that big of an age difference between a new teacher and
that's a
and
fact.
a
Yeah,
senior that
that's
may
a
be
fact.
18 years old.
Yeah, I was
Um,
23 when I first started teaching, and yeah, my clients were 18.
yeah,
So
so
yeah,
there's not that much difference. But as a
I'm not
society,
clients, my students. So
we've just decided that's a bad idea.
yeah, bad.
Giving because you're giving grades, the public perceives that as being a terrible at-risk situation, and so I don't. It's not the same.
What
But
about in college? Do you think it's the same thing as a professor dating their student when their student is 20 years old and they're, however old they are, 40?
yeah, I think it's terrible to date somebody that you're giving grades to.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if you're
For
both
who? The teacher?
both,
Ah, okay.
we're only grading your schoolwork, not your extracurriculars. So yeah,
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for being along. Okay.
all right.
Um, I want to speak just a second about Charles going on the crazy train with the high school teacher dating students. We are only talking about adults here. Absolutely. For our conversation here, I would like to know what you think. Was it personal or professional ethics or both that drove Charles's decision? I would like to know, do you think is it a good idea to develop a personal relationship, friendly or familiar, of any kind of with someone you're in a professional relationship with? Do you think that Charles had an obligation to his profession, in particular, how lawyers are perceived, to wait? I don't believe I'm the only person in the world that has a dim view of lawyers. I believe my situation represents another ethical subject that's especially timely, in that once we are able to learn about each other, we can appreciate each other. Thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate your thoughts.